I took them away from all that. Now they work for me. My name is Charlie. He says, oh, so they went to the academy. I said, yeah, you'll see that, the main title.
Aaron Spelling and Carolyn Jones were Hollywood's ultimate team. When they married in 1953, Carolyn was the big star who believed in Aaron, even pushing him to quit acting and start writing scripts. They were devoted to each other, but as Aaron became a huge success, their perfect romance started to fall apart. For years, fans wondered what went wrong between the producer and the Addams Family star. Before he passed away, Spelling finally shared the real reason they split. Was their marriage ruined by the very fame they chased together? Or did success simply pull them apart? Join us as we uncover the truth. Aaron Spelling kept hidden for decades. The boy who couldn't walk, the tragic childhood of Aaron Spelling. Before the worldwide fame of Charlie's Angels, Dynasty, and Beverly Hills, 90210, and long before the divorce that caught people off guard, Aaron Spelling began his life far from Hollywood in Dallas, Texas. He was born into a family shaped by struggle and survival. His parents, David Spelling and Pearl Spelling, were Russian Jewish immigrants who had come to the United States looking for something steadier than what they left behind. His father made a living as a tailor, quietly rebuilding a life stitch by stitch, even changing the family name from Sperling to Spelling along the way. But the past never sat too far in the background. Before that life began, his mother had already lived through loss, having lost her first husband, Sam Seltzer, to a violent death just a year before she remarried. Aaron grew up as the youngest of 5, surrounded by older siblings who had already seen more of the world than he had. 2 older brothers, Sam and Daniel, and 2 half-siblings, Max and Becky, filled the house with history, with stories, and with expectations that quietly hung in the air. But childhood wasn't easy. At just 8 years old, something happened that would stay with him long after the moment passed. Constant anti-Semitic bullying at school didn't just hurt his feelings. It affected his body. The stress became so intense that he lost the use of his legs, a condition doctors later understood as psychosomatic. For nearly a year, he was confined to bed, cut off from the outside world, forced to sit still while everything else moved on without him. And then, just as suddenly as it came, he recovered. Fully. That period didn't define him, but it left a mark. It gave him time to think, to imagine, to build stories in his head while his body stood still. And when he finally stepped back into the world, he carried that quiet resilience with him. He went on to attend Forest Avenue High School in Dallas, blending back into a life that, on the surface, looked ordinary again. But there was already something forming beneath it, something that would later find its way onto screens across the world. Then came the war. During World War II, he served in the United States Army Air Corps, not on the front lines, but in a role that still told a story. He entertained troops on a ship, lifting spirits in the middle of uncertainty, and worked as a correspondent for Stars and Stripes, writing and observing, already learning how to capture moments and turn them into something people could feel. By the time 1949 came around, he had graduated from Southern Methodist University. Even there, he didn't quite follow a straight path. He was a cheerleader, an unexpected detail, but one that said a lot about him. He knew how to perform, how to read a crowd, how to bring energy into a room. And step by step, without much noise around it, everything he had lived through, his family's past, his own setbacks, the stories he carried was slowly lining up, preparing him for a future no one around him could fully see yet. Before the Angels, the uncredited roles of Aaron Spelling. The first steps didn't come with bright lights or big headlines. They came quietly, almost in passing. In 1953, Aaron Spelling appeared on screen for the first time, taking on a small role as Harry Williams in Vicky, a film directed by Harry Horner. It wasn't the kind of debut that turned heads, but it was a start, and for Spelling, that was enough to keep moving. That same year, he found his way into television, picking up roles in I Led 3 Lives and Dragnet, appearing across several episodes between 1953 and 1955. The work kept coming, one small part after another. By 1955, he showed up in an episode of I Love Lucy titled Tennessee Bound, slipping into one of television's biggest shows, even if only briefly. Not long after, he appeared in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then in Gunsmoke, taking on the role of Weed Pindle in its first season. None of these roles made him a star. Most were quick appearances, sometimes even uncredited. But taken together, they told a different story. By 1957, he had already built more than 25 screen appearances, quietly learning how the industry worked from the inside. He even returned to acting years later, in 1963, then again in 1995 and 1998, each time without credit, like brief reminders of where he started. In between, there were smaller moments that could have easily been overlooked. In 1954, he guest-starred as a dog catcher in the first episode of the CBS sitcom Willie, starring June Havoc. It was the kind of role most people would forget, but for Spelling, every set, every line, every day added something. He was watching, learning, paying attention. And then, almost without warning, the direction of his life began to turn. In 1956, he sold his first script, $20 Bride, to the Jane Wyman Show. It was a quiet breakthrough, but it mattered more than any acting role. Writing gave him something acting never fully did, a way to shape the story instead of just stepping into it for a moment. That shift led him to 4-Star Television, where he worked on Zane Grey Theater between 1956 and 1961. Over time, he wrote 20 episodes and produced many more, building experience piece by piece. This was where things started to come together. He wasn't just learning anymore, he was building something. While still there, he produced Burke's Law, the first project that truly worked in his favor. The show introduced a rotating lineup of guest stars, giving each episode a fresh feel. It was a format he would later return to in shows like The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. What began as an idea slowly became a signature. By 1965, he was ready to take a bigger step. He left 4-Star and signed a 2-year deal with United Artists Television. It was a risk, but it gave him something he had been working toward, a chance to lead. In April 1966, he partnered with Danny Thomas to form Thomas Spelling Productions, working closely with ABC. Their first show, Rango, didn't take off, but it opened the door. Another project, The Guns of Will Sonnet, followed, and even though not everything stuck, the momentum was there. That chapter ended in 1972, but Spelling didn't slow down. He moved into a new partnership with Leonard Goldberg, forming Spelling Goldberg Productions. This time, everything began to land. Starting in the mid-1960s, the shows came one after another. The Mod Squad, The Rookies, Family, and then the titles that would define his name. Charlie's Angels, Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, Dynasty, and Beverly Hills 90210, which would later feature his daughter, Tori Spelling. Each show built on the last, creating something bigger than any single success. There were missteps, too. In 1977, he produced the San Pedro Beach Bums, a sitcom that didn't last. But by then, one failure didn't change much. The larger picture was already in place. Years later, his story found its way back onto the screen. In 2004, he was portrayed by Dan Castellaneta in Behind the Camera, the unauthorized story of Charlie's Angels, and by Nicholas Hammond in Dynasty, The Making of a Guilty Pleasure. By then, the journey from those early, quiet roles to becoming one of television's most powerful producers had already been written. But looking back, it didn't begin with success. It began with small parts, short scenes, and a man who kept moving, even when no one was really watching. The woman who created a mogul. How Carolyn Jones saved Aaron Spelling's career. Aaron Spelling and Carolyn Jones found each other at a moment that felt uncertain, almost fragile. Carolyn was still trying to steady her footing in Hollywood, coming off her first screen appearance in The Turning Point in 1952, a role that mirrored where she stood in real life. She had spent years preparing for this path, training at the Pasadena Playhouse, after enrolling in 1947 and even undergoing nose surgery in 1950 to fit the image the industry seemed to expect. Everything had been building towards something, but nothing had quite settled yet. Then, just as quickly as things seemed to begin, they stalled. Paramount let her 6-month contract go, leaving her career hanging in that quiet, uncertain space actors know too well. And right in the middle of that pause, she met Aaron. The timing wasn't planned, but it mattered, because not long after, her career picked up again with House of Wax in 1953. The same year she and Aaron got married in April. They stepped into marriage while still trying to find their place in Hollywood. Both of them working, both of them chasing something that hadn't fully taken shape. They made a decision early on, choosing not to have children. Carolyn worried about what it would cost her, the balance between a career that demanded everything and a family that would need just as much. So they focused on the work, on building something they could both stand on. And for a while, it paid off. A screen test with Columbia Pictures led to her role in Body Snatchers in 1956, followed by a part in The Man Who Knew Too Much under Alfred Hitchcock. Her presence on screen kept growing, one role feeding into the next. By 1957, she delivered a line in The Bachelor Party that stayed with audiences, a moment that captured something raw and honest. Then came Marjorie Morningstar, earning her both a Laurel Award and a Golden Globe, recognition that confirmed what was already becoming clear. Her career was moving forward. She carried that momentum into King Creole, widely seen as one of Elvis Presley's strongest films, and then into Careering in 1959, where she gave a performance many believed was her best, even if the film itself didn't find the success it aimed for. But while Carolyn was finding her place, Aaron was still searching for his. Acting wasn't opening the same doors for him, and the gap between them started to show. She saw it before anyone else did. She pushed him to move behind the scenes, to start writing, to take control of his own path. At one point, the pressure even turned into a warning. If he didn't change direction, she might walk away. But it wasn't just words. She backed him, shared his scripts, and put his work in front of the right people until he finally got an opportunity through Dick Powell. For a moment, it felt like things might settle into place again. But by the time Aaron's career began to pick up, the strain had already set in. What they were building together started pulling them in different directions. In October 1963, they separated. Less than a year later, in August 1964, the marriage ended. It was quiet, without the kind of public fallout people might expect. Carolyn didn't ask for alimony. Aaron gave her the house, and they divided what they had built, around $400,000, and went their separate ways. And just as that chapter closed, another one opened for Carolyn. That same year, she stepped into the role that would define her for years, playing Morticia in The Addams Family. For 2 seasons, she became the face of something audiences connected with, even as the show came to an early end despite its success. After that, the work slowed down. Roles became harder to find, and she took her career on the road, performing where she could. In 1968, she married her voice coach, Herbert Green, and moved with him to Palm Springs, stepping a little further away from Hollywood. But that distance didn't last. The pull of acting brought her back, and by April 1977, the marriage ended as she returned to the industry, ready to start again. This time, she found her way back onto television, appearing in shows like Wonder Woman, Roots, and even Fantasy Island, a series connected to Erin's growing empire. She later took on a role in the soap Capital in 1982, playing Myrna Clegg, a character she held on to even as her health began to decline. In 1981, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. She knew what it meant, but she didn't stop. She kept working, kept showing up, even as the condition worsened. In the middle of it all, she married her longtime partner, Peter Bailey Britton, in September 1982, choosing to hold on to something steady as everything else grew uncertain. She continued filming, even from a wheelchair, even through pain, determined to keep going for as long as she could. And while her story moved toward its final stretch, Erin's life had already taken another turn. After their divorce, he briefly dated Jill Haworth, and later, in 1968, married Candy Spelling. With Candy, he built the family he and Carolyn once chose not to have, welcoming their daughter, Tori Spelling, in 1973, and their son, Randy Spelling, in 1978. 2 lives that once moved side by side had gone in completely different directions. One found its way deeper into television power and influence. The other kept fighting for space on screen, even when time was no longer on her side. And somewhere in between, the story of what they had together stayed behind, quiet, unfinished, and still lingering beneath everything that came after. The Spelling Will Mystery. Why Candy got everything and Tori got nothing. As Erin Spelling built a career that placed him at the center of television, the spotlight didn't always stay on his success. Over time, it began to drift, landing on controversies that followed him into his later years, raising questions that didn't come with easy answers. In 2005, a situation began to unfold behind closed doors that would later spill into public view. A nurse who had worked in his home, Charlene Richards, was first sued by Spelling and his wife, Candy Spelling, for allegedly breaking a confidentiality agreement. But the story didn't stop there. Richards responded with a lawsuit of her own, claiming that during her time working for Spelling, he made unwanted advances and behaved in ways she described as inappropriate. She also claimed she worked unpaid overtime and was never issued proper tax forms. The case moved into Superior Court, naming Spelling, his wife, and their trust, with claims that ranged from harassment and discrimination to wrongful termination. Richards sought damages, laying out her version of events. On the other side, Spelling's legal team pushed back just as firmly. His lawyer, Bert Fields, dismissed the accusations completely, calling them baseless and insisting there was no truth behind them. He framed the lawsuit as retaliation, arguing that it came only after the Spellings had taken legal action first. In his words, anyone who truly knew Erin Spelling would not believe the claims being made. While that legal battle played out, it wasn't the only criticism attached to his name. For years, especially throughout the 1970s and 1980s, many of his most popular shows carried a label that followed him everywhere: Jiggle TV. Series like Charlie's Angels were often called out for focusing heavily on appearance, particularly on women, leading to ongoing accusations that his work leaned too far into style over substance. There were also long-running disputes that stretched across decades. Writer Jerry Emmett Laird claimed that Spelling had taken the idea for the series Family without credit. The case resurfaced more than once, moving through the courts over the years, but in the end, the rulings consistently fell in Spelling's favor, with her claims dismissed. Even within the business side of his empire, conflict wasn't far behind. In 1986, producers filed a lawsuit to block a stock offering tied to Aaron Spelling Productions, arguing that it violated earlier partnership agreements connected to Dynasty and the Colbys. It was another reminder that the higher he climbed, the more complicated things became. But for all the public disputes, the most personal fractures were happening much closer to home. Behind the gates of the Spelling Manor, life looked almost unreal. The 123-room estate in Los Angeles stood as a symbol of everything Aaron had built. A place filled with more than most people could imagine. Bowling alleys, a private screening room, even rooms dedicated entirely to wrapping gifts. For his children, Tori Spelling and Randy Spelling, it felt like growing up inside a dream. Randy would later describe it as a kind of fantasy, a world where everything was within reach. But that world didn't prepare him for what came after. When Aaron passed away in 2006, following a severe stroke at the age of 83, he left behind a fortune estimated at around $500 million. On the surface, it sounded like more than enough to secure his family's future. But the details told a different story. Each of his children reportedly received about $800,000, a small fraction of what the estate was worth. The majority went to their mother, Candy, who was also named the sole trustee. Even people outside the immediate family were included, with smaller sums set aside for individuals who had been part of their lives. For Randy, the adjustment came quickly. The life he had known didn't follow him into adulthood, and he spoke openly about how it forced him to figure things out on his own, learning through trial and error what it meant to live without that safety net. For Tori, the shift felt even heavier. She faced financial struggles, at one point coming close to bankruptcy, and spoke publicly about how difficult it was to maintain even basic stability. She shared moments from her life on reality television, revealing how far things had changed from the world she once lived in. At the center of it all was a strained relationship between Tori and her mother. For years, they barely spoke, the distance between them stretching across both personal and financial decisions. Over time, there were small steps toward reconnecting, especially after Tori had children of her own. But even then, the bond never fully returned to what it once might have been. There were also questions surrounding the timing of Aaron's estate decisions. Reports suggested changes were made just 2 months before his death, at a time when Alzheimer's disease was listed as a contributing factor. Tori later shared that her father believed the amount he left her would be enough to last a lifetime, a belief that didn't quite match the reality she found herself living in. Despite everything, neither Tori nor Randy challenged the will. The estate included a no-contest clause, a legal measure designed to discourage disputes by putting their inheritances at risk if they chose to fight them. So instead of turning to the courts, they stepped back and adjusted, learning to build their lives without the kind of support people might have expected. In the end, that decision kept the family out of a legal battle, something that often tears families apart beyond repair. And while the distance between them didn't disappear overnight, it left the door open for something quieter, a chance, however small, for things to come back together over time. Because behind the success, the lawsuits, and the headlines, there was always another story unfolding. One that didn't play out on television screens but in private conversations, strained relationships, and the kind of choices that stay with a family long after everything else fades. Before death, Aaron Spelling revealed why he divorced Carolyn Jones. Aaron Spelling and Carolyn Jones came close to becoming one of those Hollywood pairings people talk about for decades. On the surface, they had everything working in their favor. They married in 1953, at a time when Carolyn's name was already gaining ground, while Aaron was still trying to find a way in. It looked like a partnership, but the balance between them told a quieter story. From the beginning, Carolyn carried more of the weight. She worked constantly, taking role after role, sometimes agreeing to parts she didn't even care for, just to keep things steady while Aaron stayed home and wrote. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but she believed in what he could become. Years later, Aaron would look back on that time with a kind of honesty that stayed with him. He admitted that when they were first married, Carolyn took jobs that didn't mean much to her, just so he could focus on writing, and he never forgot it. By 1960, he spoke about her in a way that felt certain, almost unshakable. In his words, Carolyn was the only person he needed, and what they had went beyond love into something deeper, something that felt like friendship at its core. But even in that moment, something else was already building underneath it. Because 3 years later, they would be separated. And not long after that, divorced. Their lives were moving, but not at the same pace. While Aaron was still finding his footing, Carolyn's career continued to open up. She moved through films, built a reputation, and became the steady force between them. Around that time, Aaron was still being seen as a small-time actor or an emerging writer, even getting signed by the William Morris Agency largely because of her growing presence. His real break came when he began writing for Zane Grey Theatre, working under Dick Powell, and slowly, things started to change for him. But by then, the rhythm of their relationship had already started to slip. There were long nights, time spent away, and the quiet distance that builds when two people are no longer standing in the same place, even if they're still under the same roof. By October 1963, they had separated. When the divorce was finalized in August 1964, it happened without the kind of public fight many expected. Carolyn didn't ask for alimony. She chose to walk away clean, holding on to her independence, rather than anything tied to the past. And even then, it didn't end in bitterness. They still spoke well of each other. They remained close in ways that didn't quite fit the idea of a clean break. There were even moments where they spent time together after everything had ended, as if the connection they built never fully went away, even if the marriage did. They both admitted, in their own way, that the feeling was still there, but living together had become something they couldn't manage anymore. Not long after, Carolyn stepped into the role that would define her for years, playing Morticia in the Addams Family. It was Aaron who encouraged her to take the part, a quiet reminder that even after the marriage ended, their lives were still tied together in small ways. She made the role her own. The long black wig, the tight, carefully fitted dress, the slow, controlled way she moved. It all came together to create something that felt calm, almost effortless on screen. Off-screen, it wasn't quite as easy. The wig was hot and uncomfortable, something she planned to move away from as her own hair grew out. The dress limited how she could move, forcing her into a stillness that later became part of Morticia's signature presence. Even her personal life slipped into the conversation. At one point, she joked about owning hundreds of pairs of shoes, brushing it off as something extravagant but harmless. For a while, it all worked. But the success didn't last the way she hoped. The show ended after 2 seasons, and even though it lived on through reruns, the role began to define her in a way that made it harder to move forward. She had been a film star before television, and she believed people would remember that. Still, the industry had a way of narrowing things down, and over time, the roles became fewer. At the same time, Aaron's life was moving in the opposite direction. After their marriage ended, everything he had been working toward finally came together. He stepped into his role as a writer and producer and didn't look back. One show led to another, building into a run that included Charlie's Angels, Dynasty, The Love Boat, and more. The success that had once felt distant became constant. It was a quiet reversal. The woman who had carried them in the early years began to fade from the spotlight, while the man she supported rose to a level few could reach. And somewhere in that contrast, the truth about their marriage sat, not in one single moment, but in everything that built over time. Years later, when Aaron spoke about that chapter of his life, there was no bitterness in his words. If anything, there was a kind of understanding. What they had was real, but it belonged to a time when they were both trying to become something else. As their lives changed, so did what they needed, and eventually, that gap became too wide to ignore. By the time Aaron Spelling passed away in June 2006, at the age of 83, after suffering a stroke at his Los Angeles home, the story of his life had already been written in full view. But the part he shared with Carolyn Jones stayed different, quieter, more complicated, not a dramatic ending, not a sudden break. Just two people who loved each other, stood side by side for as long as they could, and then slowly found themselves walking in different directions, even as the feeling between them never fully disappeared. What are Aaron Spelling's movies? Which is your favorite? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.